I never imagined the worst moment of my life would happen in a room full of crystal chandeliers and people who'd never worked a day with their hands. My name is Patricia Donnelly. I'm 62 years old, and I've been a nurse at Carolina Medical Center for 33 years. For the past 24 years, I've been doing it alone, ever since my husband Michael died in a construction accident, leaving me with a 9-year-old son and a mortgage I could barely afford. I wore the same 3 pairs of shoes for 5 years. I drove a car held together by duct tape and prayer. I worked double shifts until my feet bled and my back screamed, coming home at midnight to help my son with his homework. Every single cent I earned went into one thing: Evan's future. Medical school at Duke doesn't pay for itself, but I made it happen. I sacrificed everything: vacations I never took, clothes I never bought, a life I never lived, so my son could become a doctor, so he could have the opportunities I never had, so he could escape the working-class neighborhood where we lived and build something better. And he did. Evan became a successful cardiologist. He married Jessica, a corporate attorney, whose family owns half of Myers Park. They live in a beautiful house in the best part of Charlotte. They wear $1,000 suits and drive luxury cars and vacation in places I've only seen in magazines. I was so proud of him. So proud that all my sacrifice had meant something. Until tonight. Tonight was my birthday. Evan insisted on taking me to Le Rousseau, the fanciest French restaurant in Charlotte, the kind of place where reservations are made 3 months in advance and where the city's elite gather to see and be seen. I wore my nicest dress, a 10-year-old navy sheath from Belk's clearance rack. I put on drugstore lipstick and told myself I looked fine. But sitting at that table in the center of the dining room, surrounded by women dripping in diamonds and men in custom-tailored suits, I felt every bit of my 62 years. I felt poor. I felt out of place. I felt like exactly what I was, a working-class nurse who didn't belong in this world my son now inhabited. The waiter came to take our orders. Evan didn't even look at me. He leaned back in his chair with casual arrogance and said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "Serve her the cheapest dish on the menu. She doesn't deserve anything more than that." Jessica laughed, that high, tinkling laugh that made other people turn and smile, assuming it was some kind of inside joke. But I saw my son's face. There was no warmth there, no humor, just cold contempt. I sat frozen, my hands clenched in my lap, feeling like I was 50 feet underwater. The shame burned through every nerve in my body. Not shame for who I was, but shame that I had somehow failed so completely that my own child could look at me with such disdain, in front of strangers, on my birthday. She doesn't deserve anything more than that. Those words, spoken by the boy I'd rocked to sleep every night, the child I'd loved more than my own life, cut deeper than any scalpel ever could. And then something happened that I didn't expect. A man appeared at our table, silver-haired, elegant, wearing a chef's coat, Vincent Laurent, the owner of Le Rousseau. I hadn't seen Vincent in almost 2 years, though we'd stayed in touch after Michael died. Because Vincent wasn't just any restaurant owner, he was my husband's best friend. They'd served together in Iraq. Michael had saved Vincent's life, pulling him from a burning vehicle after an IED attack. And when Vincent wanted to open this restaurant, Michael had given him $20,000, the last of our savings, money I didn't even know was gone until after Michael died. Vincent looked at me, then at Evan, and I saw recognition flash across his face, not just of who Evan was, but of what had just happened. Without a word, he extended his hand to me. "Mrs. Donnelly, I've been hoping you would visit. Would you join me in the chef's private dining room? I have a tasting menu I've been saving for someone special." I was too shocked to refuse. Vincent personally escorted me away from that table, through the kitchen, into a private room I didn't know existed. For the next 2 hours, he served me himself. 7 courses of the most beautiful food I'd ever seen, each dish accompanied by stories of Michael, of their friendship, of the man who had given everything so others could succeed. Meanwhile, Evan and Jessica sat in the main dining room, watching through the glass partition as the woman they'd humiliated was treated like royalty. The whispers spread through the restaurant. The story began to circulate. My public humiliation became my son's public shame. But that was just the beginning, because now I have to decide what comes next. Evan has been calling, leaving desperate voicemails, his apologies tumbling out in words that sound more panicked than sincere. Jessica's mother heard about the incident. Charlotte society runs on gossip, and this story is too good not to share. Evan's reputation is at stake. His marriage is strained. Everything he's built could crumble because of one cruel moment. He says he's sorry. He says he didn't mean it. He says he was stressed about work, that it was a stupid joke that went too far. But I keep hearing that voice, seeing that look in his eyes. She doesn't deserve anything more than that. As if 30 years of sacrifice, of unconditional love, of believing in him when he didn't believe in himself, amounted to nothing. As if I was an embarrassment to be minimized and dismissed. I know I'll forgive him eventually. Not because he deserves it, but because he's still my son. Because I can't carry this poison forever. Because Michael would want me to. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It doesn't mean our relationship will ever be the same. Some wounds heal, but they leave scars that change the shape of everything that comes after. This is my story. The story of how I learned that you can do everything right and still raise someone who disappoints you. The story of how I discovered that maternal love has limits. Not in its depth, but in its power to transform the person on the receiving end. The story of how I found dignity in my most undignified moment, through the kindness of a stranger who remembered what my son had forgotten. And most importantly, this is the story of how I finally learned something I should have known all along. I was never the cheapest thing on the menu. I was always worth the 7-course meal, the private dining room, the finest wine. I just forgot it for a while. But I'm starting to remember. The morning of my 62nd birthday started the way most of my mornings had for the past 33 years, with the harsh buzz of my alarm clock at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before I actually needed to be awake. I'd learned long ago that those extra 13 minutes of knowing I could go back to sleep made the actual waking up more bearable. It was a small mercy I gave myself. Like the fancy French vanilla creamer I kept hidden in the back of the fridge at the nurse's station, the one I told myself I deserved after a particularly difficult shift. I lay there in my bedroom in the small ranch house in Northeast Charlotte, listening to the sound of my neighbor's dog barking and the distant hum of traffic building on I-85. The ceiling fan made its familiar tick-tick-tick sound. The same sound it had made for 15 years. The same sound I kept meaning to fix but never got around to. Michael would have fixed it in 5 minutes. Michael would have climbed up there with his toolbox and his patient hands and made everything right again. But Michael had been dead for 24 years, and I'd learned to live with the tick-tick-tick. I pulled myself out of bed, my knees protesting the way they always did lately, and padded into the bathroom. The woman in the mirror looked tired. She always looked tired. Gray streaks ran through her dark brown hair like silver threads, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. Or maybe they had been, and I just hadn't noticed. When you spend 12-hour shifts under fluorescent lights wearing scrubs and comfortable shoes, you stop paying attention to things like lines around your eyes. I showered quickly, the water pressure weak as always, and dressed in my standard uniform. Dark blue scrubs with little white flowers that I'd bought in bulk from a medical supply store. Practical, washable, forgettable. I pulled my hair back into a low ponytail, applied the drugstore moisturizer I'd been using since 1998, and swiped on some mascara. That was the extent of my beauty routine. I used to care more, back when Michael was alive, back when I had someone to look pretty for. Now it felt like vanity, like wasted time I could spend doing something useful. In the kitchen, I made coffee in the same Mr. Coffee machine I'd had since Evan was in high school. The pot was stained, the plastic cracked in one corner, but it worked. That was my philosophy about most things. If it works, don't replace it. I poured my coffee into a travel mug with the Carolina Medical Center logo on it. A gift from the hospital after 25 years of service. 25 years. A quarter of a century of bedpans and IVs and holding the hands of dying patients while their families sobbed in the hallway. I should have felt proud. Mostly I felt exhausted. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Evan. "Happy birthday, Mom. Jessica and I want to take you to dinner tonight. Somewhere special. 7 p.m.? I'll text you the address." I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling that familiar swell of complicated emotion I always felt when it came to my son. Pride, yes. Love, absolutely. But also something else. Something I was ashamed to name. Distance. The sense that the boy I'd raised had become a man I didn't quite recognize. A man who lived in a world I couldn't enter even if I wanted to. I texted back. "That sounds lovely. Thank you, sweetheart." Sweetheart. I still called him that. Even though he was 33 years old, even though he was a successful cardiologist with a house in Myers Park and a wife whose engagement ring cost more than my annual salary. He would always be my sweetheart. the little boy with the gap-toothed smile who used to fall asleep on my lap while I watched the evening news, who cried in my arms the night his father died, who promised me he would make me proud. And he had made me proud, hadn't he? I grabbed my purse, a worn leather bag I'd had for a decade, and headed out to my car. The Honda Civic I'd driven during Evan's childhood was long gone, traded in for a 2012 Toyota Camry that was practical and reliable, and the exact color of wet concrete. It had 147,000 miles on it, and a bumper sticker that said, "Nurses call the shots," that one of my coworkers had stuck on there as a joke 3 years ago. I'd never bothered to peel it off. The drive to the hospital took 23 minutes, the same route I'd taken thousands of times before. Down Eastway Drive, past the gas stations and the fast food restaurants and the auto repair shops with hand-painted signs. Past the elementary school where Evan had learned to read, where he'd been chosen to represent his class in the school-wide spelling bee. He'd won. Of course he'd won. Evan had always won. I pulled into the hospital parking lot at 6:42 a.m., parked in my usual spot in the back corner where I wouldn't have to circle looking for something closer. The walk was good for me anyway, or so I told myself. The morning air was cool and damp, typical for early October in Charlotte. The sky was that pale gray color that promised the sun would burn through eventually, but not yet. Not quite yet. Inside, the hospital smelled the way it always smelled. Antiseptic and floor wax and something vaguely metallic that I'd never been able to identify. I swiped my badge at the employee entrance and took the stairs to the 4th floor, cardiac care, where I'd worked for the past 18 years. My legs burned by the 3rd floor, but I kept going. The elevator was for patients and visitors. Staff took the stairs. "There's the birthday girl," Denise called out when I pushed through the doors to the nurses' station. Denise was my closest friend at work. A petite black woman with a voice that could carry across 3 hospital wings and a laugh that made everyone around her smile. She'd been a nurse for 30 years, longer than I had, and she treated me like a younger sister even though we were the same age. "Please don't make a big deal out of it," I said, dropping my purse in my locker and pulling on my hospital ID badge. "Too late." Denise grinned and gestured to the break room where I could see balloons and what looked like a sheet cake from Harris Teeter. "You think we're gonna let you hit 62 without celebrating? Girl, please." I felt my throat tighten. This was too much. It was always too much when people were kind to me. I didn't know what to do with kindness that I hadn't earned through some form of suffering first. "You didn't have to do this," I said. "We know we didn't have to. We wanted to." Denise put her arm around my shoulders and squeezed. "You deserve it, Pat. Lord knows you deserve it." The morning passed in the usual blur of vitals and medications and patient rotations. I checked on Mr. Henderson in 412, who was recovering from a triple bypass and kept insisting he was fine enough to go home. Never mind that he could barely walk to the bathroom without getting winded. I changed the IV for Mrs. Parkin 407, a sweet Korean woman who always thanked me in both English and Korean, who reminded me of my own mother in some indefinable way. I held the hand of a scared 26-year-old named Brandon, who'd just learned he needed a pacemaker, who kept asking me if he was going to die, if his life was over. "You're going to be fine," I told him, and I meant it. "This is the beginning of taking care of yourself, not the end. You're going to live a long, full life." He cried, and I let him, and I didn't tell him that I knew what it felt like to be young and terrified that everything was about to change forever. At lunch, Denise and I sat in the break room with our Tupperware containers. Mine had leftover chicken and rice. Hers had some kind of elaborate salad with quinoa and roasted vegetables that made my meal look even sadder by comparison. "So, what are your birthday plans?" Denise asked, spearing a cherry tomato with her fork. "Evan's taking me to dinner tonight." "Oh, that's nice. Where's he taking you?" "I don't know yet. He said somewhere special." Denise raised her eyebrows. "Special like Olive Garden or special like expensive?" I laughed. Knowing Evan, probably expensive. He likes to make an impression. Nothing wrong with that. The boy's successful. Let him spoil his mama. I nodded, but something uncomfortable twisted in my stomach. Evan did like to make impressions. He liked to be seen as successful, as generous, as the kind of son who took his mother to expensive restaurants. But I couldn't remember the last time he'd asked me how I was doing. Really asked, not just the performative, "How are you?" that people say when they don't actually want an answer. "How's Jessica?" Denise asked as if reading my mind. "She's fine, I think. Busy with work." "You think?" I sighed. "I don't see them very much. They're both so busy, and I don't want to impose." "Impose?" "Pat, you're his mother. You're not imposing. I know, but I trailed off, not sure how to explain the feeling I got whenever I was around Evan and Jessica. Like I was something they had to manage, a responsibility they'd checked off their list. Visit mom. Done. Next item. But what? Nothing. It's fine. I'm being silly. Denise gave me a look that said she didn't believe me, but she let it drop. We finished our lunches in comfortable silence, and then it was time to get back to work. The afternoon was busier than the morning. A new admission came in around 2 p.m. A 58-year-old man named Robert Garcia who'd had a heart attack while coaching his daughter's soccer game. His wife and 3 daughters were in the waiting room, shell-shocked and terrified. I spent 20 minutes with them, explaining what was happening, what to expect, holding the wife's hands while she cried and asked me if he was going to die. The doctors are doing everything they can, I told her, which was the truth, even if it wasn't the reassurance she wanted. When my shift ended at 6 p.m., I was exhausted in that bone-deep way that had become so familiar, I barely noticed it anymore. I changed out of my scrubs in the locker room, pulling on the dress I'd brought with me, the navy sheath from Belk's that I'd bought on clearance 10 years ago. It was the nicest thing I owned, the dress I wore to church on Easter and Christmas, to the occasional hospital fundraiser, to any event where I needed to look like I'd made an effort. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, trying to see what other people saw. A middle-aged woman in a dated dress, gray in her hair, tired eyes, hands that were red and chapped from constant washing and sanitizer. I put on lipstick, Revlon Color Stay in soft rose, the same shade I'd worn for 20 years, and told myself I looked fine. Good enough. Presentable. Evan had texted me the address, Le Rousseau on South Tryon Street in Uptown. My stomach dropped. I'd heard of Le Rousseau. Everyone in Charlotte had heard of Le Rousseau. It was the kind of restaurant where CEOs took clients, where engagement rings were presented, where the Charlotte elite gathered to see and be seen. The kind of place that required reservations months in advance, and where a single meal could cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, staring at the address, feeling my chest tighten with anxiety. Why would Evan take me there? It was too much. It was too fancy. I didn't belong in a place like that. But maybe that was the point. Maybe Evan wanted to show me that he'd made it, that all my sacrifices had been worth it. Maybe he wanted to share his success with me, to give me a glimpse of the world he now inhabited. Or maybe, and this was the thought I tried to push away but couldn't quite manage, maybe he wanted to show everyone else that he was the kind of son who took his mother to the fanciest restaurant in Charlotte. The drive downtown took 30 minutes in rush hour traffic. I found street parking 3 blocks away and walked, my sensible pumps clicking on the sidewalk, my purse clutched against my side. Uptown Charlotte was beautiful in the early evening light, glass towers reflecting the sunset, young professionals in expensive suits hurrying to happy hour, the distant sound of construction from the light rail expansion everyone had been talking about for years. Le Rousseau was on the ground floor of a historic building that had been renovated with that careful blend of old and new that rich people found charming. The exterior was brick, the windows tall and arched, with a discreet sign in elegant script that simply said, Le Rousseau. No need for anything more. If you knew, you knew. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The interior took my breath away, soaring ceilings with exposed beams, crystal chandeliers that cast a warm, golden glow, white tablecloths and gleaming silverware and fresh flowers on every table. The air smelled like butter and wine and something else, something expensive that I couldn't name. A pianist in the corner played something classical and beautiful. Everyone was dressed impeccably, men in tailored suits, women in designer dresses and glittering jewelry. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Or maybe that was just my imagination. Maybe no one was looking at me at all. Maybe I was invisible, the way older women so often are. Good evening, madam. Do you have a reservation? The hostess was young and stunning, with the kind of bone structure that suggested expensive genetics. She smiled at me politely, professionally, but I could see her taking in my dress, my drugstore makeup, my sensible shoes. Yes, I'm meeting my son, Evan Donnelly. Her expression changed instantly, brightening with recognition. Of course, Dr. Donnelly's party. Right this way. She led me through the dining room, past tables where people ate with the casual confidence of those who'd never had to check a price before ordering. I caught fragments of conversation, business deals, vacation homes in the mountains, someone's daughter getting into Princeton. This was not my world. This would never be my world. And then I saw Evan, He stood when he saw me approaching, and for a moment he was just my son again, tall and handsome in his perfectly fitted suit, his dark hair touched with just a hint of gray at the temples, his smile broad and familiar. This was the boy I'd raised. This was the child I'd loved more than my own life. Mom. He pulled me into a hug, and I breathed in his cologne, something expensive and masculine that I didn't recognize. When he pulled away, his hands lingered on my shoulders for just a moment. Happy birthday. You look great. Thank you, sweetheart. I glanced at the woman seated at the table. Jessica, his wife, gorgeous as always in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her blonde hair fell in those perfectly imperfect waves that I knew required serious money to achieve. Diamonds glinted at her ears and throat. Patricia, so good to see you. Jessica stood and air-kissed both my cheeks in that affected way she had, as if we were European aristocracy instead of a nurse and a lawyer in Charlotte, North Carolina. You look lovely. The compliment felt empty, performative, but I smiled anyway. Thank you, Jessica. You look beautiful, as always. We sat down and I took in our surroundings. The table was in the center of the dining room, prominently placed, visible to everyone. There was no privacy here, no intimacy. This was a table for being seen. This place is incredible, I said because I had to say something. Thank you for bringing me here. Only the best for you, Mom. Evan smiled, but there was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Pride, nervousness, something else? A waiter appeared, young, impeccably dressed, with the kind of formal bearing that made me sit up straighter. Good evening. May I start you with something to drink? We have an extensive wine list or perhaps a cocktail. I'll have the Chateau Margaux, Evan said without looking at the menu. The 2015, if you have it. The waiter's eyebrows lifted slightly. An excellent choice, sir. And for the ladies? I'll have the same, Jessica said. They both looked at me. I had no idea what they'd just ordered. I didn't drink wine, except for the occasional glass of cheap Chardonnay at hospital retirement parties. I'll just have water, please, with lemon. I saw something flicker across Evan's face. Disappointment? Embarrassment? Are you sure, Mom? This is a celebration. Have something nice. Water is fine, sweetheart. I have to drive home. The waiter nodded and disappeared. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. So, Jessica said brightly, filling the void, how was work today? It was fine. Busy. We had a new admission this afternoon, a heart attack patient. It's always hard on the families. I'm sure it is, Jessica said, but her eyes had already glazed over. She didn't actually want to hear about my work. This was just small talk, the social lubricant that people use to fill awkward pauses. How are things at the firm? I asked, trying to show interest. Insane, honestly. We're in the middle of this massive merger and I've been working 70-hour weeks. It's exhausting. Jessica sighed dramatically, and I noticed her nails, perfectly manicured, painted in a subtle nude color. But the partners are pleased, so that's what matters. And you, Evan? How's the practice? My son leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the white tablecloth. Good. Really good, actually. We're expanding. Opening a second location in South Charlotte, and I'm being considered for Chief of Cardiology at Presbyterian. Evan, that's wonderful. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Your father would be so proud. For just a second, something softened in his expression. Yeah, I think he would. But then, the moment passed and he was pulling his hand away, straightening his tie, glancing around the restaurant to see who might be watching us. The waiter returned with their wine and my water. He presented the bottle to Evan with great ceremony, poured a small amount for him to taste, waited for his approval before filling Jessica's glass and then Evan's. The whole ritual felt absurd to me, but Evan clearly enjoyed it. This was his world now. This was what he'd become. Shall I describe tonight's specials? The waiter asked. Please, Evan said. The waiter launched into a lengthy description of dishes I could barely understand. Words like just and confit and reduction that meant nothing to me. I tried to follow along, but honestly, I just felt lost and out of place. When he finished, he handed us menus bound in leather. I opened mine and felt my stomach drop. There were no prices. I'd heard about restaurants like this, where if you had to ask how much something cost, you couldn't afford to be there. But I'd never actually experienced it. I scanned the menu desperately, trying to find something simple, something that wouldn't cost a fortune. There had to be something reasonable, didn't there? but everything sounded elaborate and expensive. Duck breast with cherry gastrique, pan-roasted halibut with saffron beurre blanc, Wagyu beef with truffle pomace puree. "What looks good to you, Mom?" Evan asked, not looking up from his own menu. "Oh, I don't know. Everything sounds delicious." "The duck is supposed to be excellent here," Jessica offered. "I had it last time we came. It's divine." Last time they came? Of course. They came here regularly. This was their restaurant, their scene. And I was just a visitor, a tourist in my son's life. "I think I'll just have a salad," I said. Evan's head snapped up. "A salad?" "Mom, come on. This is your birthday. Order something real." "I'm just not very hungry, sweetheart." "Patricia, honestly, you have to try something more adventurous," Jessica said, her voice carrying that faintly condescending tone she used when she was trying to be helpful. "When are you going to get another chance to eat at a place like this?" The implication was clear. This is a once-in-a-lifetime experience for you, so don't waste it on a salad. "I'll think about it," I said quietly. The truth was, I felt paralyzed. I didn't know what anything on this menu was. I didn't know how to pronounce half the words. I didn't want to embarrass myself, or worse, embarrass Evan by ordering wrong, by revealing myself as the working-class woman I'd always been and would always be, no matter how many times my son brought me to fancy restaurants. The waiter returned. "Have we decided?" "I'll have the lamb," Evan said. "Medium rare." "The sea base for me," Jessica added. They both looked at me. "I'll have the chicken," I said, pointing to the simplest-sounding item I could find. "Excellent choice," the waiter said, though something in his tone suggested it wasn't excellent at all, that I'd just ordered the most boring thing on the menu. He collected our menus and disappeared again. "So," Evan said, taking a sip of his wine, "we need to talk about something." My heart sank. Nothing good ever followed. "We need to talk. Jessica and I have been thinking," he continued, "about your living situation." I blinked. "My living situation?" "That house you're in," Jessica said, leaning forward. "It's getting old, isn't it? And you're getting older. We worry about you being there alone." "I'm fine in my house," I said, feeling defensive. "I've lived there for 30 years. "That's exactly our point," Evan said. 30 years. The place has to be falling apart. And it's not in the best neighborhood anymore. "What's wrong with my neighborhood?" "Mom, be realistic. It's not safe. There's crime. The schools are terrible. The property values have tanked." "I don't have children in school, Evan, and I've never had any problems with crime." "Yet," Jessica said ominously. "You haven't had problems yet." I felt anger flare in my chest, hot and unfamiliar. "What are you suggesting?" "We're suggesting," Evan said carefully, "that you might want to think about downsizing. Maybe a nice apartment in a senior community, something where you'd have people around, where someone would check on you. It would give us peace of mind." A senior community. He wanted to put me in a senior community. I was 62 years old. I still worked full-time. I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself. And my son wanted to put me somewhere where someone would check on me. "I'm not moving," I said, my voice firmer than I'd intended. "Mom, just think about it." I said, "I'm not moving, Evan. That house is my home. It's where I raised you. It's where your father and I built our life together. I'm not leaving." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Jessica took a long sip of her wine. Evan's jaw tightened in that way it did when he didn't get what he wanted. "We're just trying to help," he said finally. "I don't need that kind of help." The waiter appeared with our food, and I'd never been so grateful for an interruption in my life. He set the plates down with elaborate care, describing each dish in detail that I barely heard. All I could think about was what Evan had just said, what he'd just suggested. He wanted to uproot me, to move me somewhere appropriate, somewhere that wouldn't embarrass him when his colleagues asked where his mother lived. The food was beautiful, of course it was, but I barely tasted it. The chicken was tender and perfectly seasoned, served with some kind of vegetable I didn't recognize, and a sauce that was probably spectacular. But it could have been cardboard for all I cared. I pushed it around my plate, trying to look like I was eating, trying to smile when appropriate, trying to pretend that everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. Across the restaurant, I noticed a man watching our table. He was older, maybe late 50s or early 60s, with silver hair and an elegant bearing. He wore a chef's coat and was speaking with diners at another table, but his eyes kept drifting back to us, to me, specifically. I looked away, uncomfortable with the attention. "So, Mom," Evan said, cutting into his lamb, Tell us what's new with you. Besides work. Not much, really. Same as always. Come on, there must be something. Are you seeing anyone? I almost laughed. Seeing anyone? Evan, I'm 62 years old. So, you're not dead. Jessica's mother is dating a very nice man she met at her book club. Good for Jessica's mother. I'm not interested. Why not? Dad's been gone for over 20 years. Don't you get lonely? Yes, I wanted to say. I get so lonely sometimes I can barely breathe. I get lonely in my empty house with its ticking ceiling fan and its memories of a man who died too young. I get lonely at work when I hold the hands of dying patients and wonder who will hold my hand when it's my turn. I get lonely when my only child takes me to fancy restaurants and suggests I move to a senior community because the house where I raised him isn't good enough anymore. But I didn't say any of that. I'm fine, I said instead. I have my work, I have my friends, I have a good life. If you say so, Evan said, but he sounded doubtful. The meal continued in fits and starts of conversation. Jessica talked about a vacation they were planning to Turks and Caicos. Evan mentioned a new BMW he was considering buying. I sat there and nodded and smiled and felt more alone than I'd felt in years. It was when the waiter came back to take our plates that everything changed. Was everything satisfactory? He asked, his voice professionally pleasant. It was excellent, Evan said. Really top-notch. I'm so glad to hear it. And for you, madam. He turned to me. It was lovely, I said. Thank you. And for the birthday lady, perhaps a dessert. We have a wonderful chocolate souffle that's quite popular. Before I could respond, Evan spoke up. Actually, he said, and there was something in his voice that made me look at him, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Bring her whatever's cheapest on the dessert menu. The waiter blinked. I'm sorry, sir? You heard me. Evan's voice was louder now, carrying across nearby tables. Bring her the cheapest thing you have. She doesn't deserve anything more than that. The world seemed to stop. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just sat there, frozen. While my son, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, the boy I'd loved more than my own life, looked at me with cold contempt. Jessica laughed. It was a high, tinkling sound that cut through me like glass. Oh my God, Evan, she said, still laughing. That's terrible. Other diners were turning now, looking at our table. Some of them were smiling, assuming it was a joke, some kind of family humor they weren't in on. But I could see the ones who understood, who saw the cruelty for what it was. Their eyes were wide, shocked, embarrassed for me. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could I possibly say? How could I respond to this? The waiter looked uncomfortable, glancing between Evan and me. Sir, Did I stutter? Evan said, his voice sharp. Just do what I said. And that's when I saw him, the silver-haired man in the chef's coat, moving toward our table with purpose. His expression was thunderous. He reached our table in 3 long strides. Dr. Donnelly, he said, his voice carrying a slight French accent. I'm Vincent Laurent, the owner of this establishment. Evan looked up, surprised, suddenly aware that this had gotten out of hand. Oh, nice to meet you. Great restaurant you have here. I was not speaking to you. Vincent cut him off coldly. Then he turned to me, and his entire demeanor changed. His expression softened, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite identify. Patricia, he said gently. Patricia Donnelly. It's been too long. I stared at him, my mind racing, trying to place him. And then suddenly, I did. Vincent? My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Vincent Laurent? You remember. He smiled, and it was warm and genuine and full of a kindness I desperately needed in that moment. I should have called you. I should have let you know I was back in Charlotte, but I've been hoping you would come visit my restaurant. And now, finally, you're here. He extended his hand to me, and I took it, feeling the warmth of his palm against mine. Mrs. Donnelly, he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. I have a private dining room that I reserve for my most honored guests. Would you do me the honor of joining me there? I've been working on a new tasting menu, and I would be grateful for your opinion. I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe, but I nodded. Vincent helped me up from my chair with the careful courtesy of a man who'd been raised to treat women with respect. He turned to Evan and Jessica, and his expression was ice. Your meals will be on the house, he said flatly. Enjoy your evening. And then he was guiding me away from that table, away from my son's shocked face and Jessica's open mouth, through the dining room where every eye was on us, through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos. Flames leaping from pans, knives flashing against cutting boards, voices calling out in French and English, the clatter of plates and the hiss of steam. But the moment Vincent and I stepped through those doors, it was as if someone had turned down the volume. Chefs looked up from their stations. Sous chefs paused mid-chop. Everyone seemed to sense that something significant was happening. "Back to work, everyone," Vincent said quietly but firmly. "We have a full house tonight." The kitchen resumed its rhythm, but I could feel their eyes on me as Vincent led me through the maze of stainless steel and white tile, past the prep stations and the massive stoves, toward a door at the back I hadn't noticed before. He opened it, and I stepped into a different world. The private dining room was small and intimate, with wood-paneled walls and soft lighting that came from elegant sconces rather than the crystal chandeliers of the main dining area. There was a single table, beautifully set for one, positioned near a window that overlooked the Charlotte skyline. The city lights twinkled in the distance like earthbound stars. "Please," Vincent said, pulling out the chair for me. "Sit." I sat, because I didn't know what else to do. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. Vincent disappeared for a moment, and I sat there alone, trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand how my birthday dinner had turned into the most humiliating moment of my life, trying to figure out how the little boy I'd rocked to sleep had become a man who could say those words to me in front of a room full of strangers. "She doesn't deserve anything more than that." The words echoed in my head, over and over, like a terrible song I couldn't turn off. Vincent returned carrying a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. He poured for both of us, then sat down across from me. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm so sorry you had to witness that. I should go—" "Patricia." Vincent's voice was gentle but firm. "You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. Do you understand me?" I shook my head. "That was my son. My son said those things. I know who he is." Vincent's expression darkened. I recognized him the moment he walked in. I've seen him here before, actually. He brings his wife every few months. And every time, I think about Michael, and I wonder what he would think if he could see his son now. At the mention of Michael's name, something broke inside me. The tears I'd been holding back since Evan spoke those words finally came, hot and unstoppable, streaming down my face in a way that probably ruined what little makeup I'd been wearing. "I'm sorry," I kept saying, even as I cried. "I'm so sorry." "Stop apologizing." Vincent reached across the table and took my hand, the same way he'd done at Michael's funeral 24 years ago, when I'd stood at the graveside unable to believe that my husband was really gone. "You raised that boy alone. You worked yourself to exhaustion to give him everything. And this is how he treats you?" "I don't understand," I said, wiping at my face with my napkin. "I don't understand what I did wrong. I gave him everything, Vincent. Everything. You did nothing wrong." He did. And what he did tonight was unforgivable. We sat in silence for a moment, my hand still in his, while I tried to pull myself together. Finally, I took a shaky breath and managed to look at him properly. Vincent had aged well. His hair had gone completely silver, but it suited him. He had laugh lines around his eyes and a certain elegance in the way he moved, the way he spoke. He'd always been handsome, even back when he and Michael were young men in their 20s, fresh out of the Gulf War and trying to figure out what to do with their lives. "I can't believe you're here," I said. "In Charlotte, with this restaurant. Michael would have been so proud of you. He was my first investor, you know. When I told him I wanted to open a French restaurant in Charlotte, everyone else thought I was crazy. But Michael believed in me. He always believed in me." Vincent smiled sadly. "He was the best friend I ever had, the best man I ever knew. He loved you like a brother. And I loved him the same way, which is why seeing his son treat his widow like that—" Vincent's jaw tightened. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to throw him out of my restaurant. "You can't do that. He's a customer. He's a man who dishonored his mother in my establishment. There are standards, Patricia. There are things I will not tolerate no matter how much money someone has." Vincent stood up and walked to a small cabinet in the corner. He returned with a framed photograph that he handed to me. It was Michael and Vincent, standing in front of a bombed-out building somewhere in Iraq. They were both so young, their faces barely lined, wearing their desert fatigues and combat boots. Michael had his arm around Vincent's shoulders, and they were both grinning at the camera with the kind of joy that only comes from surviving something terrible together. "I keep this in my office," Vincent said. "I look at it every day. Do you know what your husband said to me after he pulled me out of that vehicle? When we were lying there in the sand, waiting for the medics, and I was screaming because I couldn't feel my legs? I shook my head, unable to speak. He said, "You're going to be fine, brother. You're going to walk again. You're going to cook again. You're going to open that restaurant you keep talking about, and it's going to be the best damn restaurant in America. And I'm going to be there on opening night with my beautiful wife, and we're going to toast to your success." That's what he said. That's what kept me alive. "I didn't know," I whispered. "He never told you?" Of course he didn't. That was Michael. He never talked about the things he did for people. Vincent carefully took the photograph back and set it on the table between us. "He saved my life, and then he gave me the money to start this place. Did you know that?" "No, he never—" I stopped, realization dawning. Wait, is that where the life insurance money went? After Michael died, there had been a substantial life insurance payout from his construction company. But when I'd finally gotten around to checking the accounts, most of it had been gone. I'd assumed it had been spent on bills and Evan's expenses, but I'd never looked closely. I'd been too grief-stricken to care about money. "He made me promise not to tell you," Vincent said. "He put it in his will. $20,000 to help me get started. He said you'd try to give it back if you knew, and I wasn't allowed to let you. $20,000. In 1991, that was a fortune. That was a year of Evan's college tuition. That was a new car. That was security. And Michael had given it away. He believed in you," I said softly. "He believed in people. He believed in giving them chances. He believed in loyalty and friendship and doing the right thing, even when it was hard." Vincent looked at me intently. "He believed in you most of all. He used to tell me that you were the strongest person he'd ever met, that you could survive anything, that Evan was lucky to have you as a mother." The tears were coming again, but this time they felt different. Not tears of humiliation, but tears of grief for a man I still missed every single day, even after all these years. "I miss him so much," I said. "I know. I do too." Vincent stood up again. "Now I'm going to feed you. Really feed you. And you're going to sit here in this beautiful room, and you're going to remember that you are worth more than 1,000 of your son. Do you understand?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. What followed was the most extraordinary meal of my life. Vincent brought out 7 courses, each one more beautiful and delicious than the last. He served me himself, explaining each dish, telling me stories about where he'd learned to make it, sharing memories of Michael between courses. There was a delicate soup with flavors I couldn't identify, a salad with flowers that were somehow edible, fish that melted on my tongue, meat so tender I barely had to chew it. Halfway through the meal, a woman joined us, Vincent's wife, Céline. She was French, elegant in that effortless way that European women always seem to be, with dark hair touched with gray and warm brown eyes. She embraced me like an old friend, though we'd never met. "Vincent has told me so much about you," she said, her accent more pronounced than her husband's. "About Michael. About what you did for Vincent after the war. How you welcomed him into your home. How you treated him like family." "Anyone would have done the same," I said. "No," Céline said firmly. "Not everyone. Most people, they make promises. But you and Michael, you kept yours. You were there for him when he needed someone most." I didn't remember it that way. I just remembered Vincent coming to stay with us for a few months after he got back from Iraq, sleeping on our couch while he did physical therapy and figured out what to do next. I remembered Michael driving him to appointments, helping him with exercises, refusing to let him give up when the pain got too bad. I remembered cooking extra food so Vincent wouldn't go hungry, listening to him talk about his dreams of becoming a chef, encouraging him the same way I encouraged everyone. It hadn't seemed like anything special at the time. It had just seemed like what you did for people you cared about. But sitting there in that private dining room, being served by this successful man and his lovely wife, being treated with such care and respect, I realized that maybe it had been special. Maybe kindness was always special, even when it felt ordinary. We talked for hours, about Michael, yes, but about other things too. About Vincent's restaurant, about Céline's jewelry business, about their 2 daughters who were both in college, about my work at the hospital, about the patients I'd cared for over the years, about the small victories and the heartbreaking losses. They asked about Evan, and I found myself telling them the truth. Not the sanitized version I usually offered, but the real, painful truth. That I barely saw him anymore. That when I did see him, I felt like an obligation rather than a mother. That tonight hadn't been the first time he'd made me feel small, just the most public. He tells people I'm simple, I said, surprising myself with the admission. I overheard him once, talking to Jessica's parents at some holiday party they invited me to. They were asking about me and he said, "Oh, she's simple. She's just a nurse. She doesn't really understand how the world works." And everyone laughed, like it was charming somehow, like it was sweet that I was too unsophisticated to know better. "That's not simple," Celine said fiercely. "That's cruelty. That's a man who is ashamed of where he came from, and so he diminishes it." "He wasn't always like this," I said. "When he was younger, he was so proud to tell people I was a nurse. He used to bring his friends to the hospital and show me off. 'That's my mom,' he'd say. 'She saves lives.'" "When did that change?" Vincent and Celine exchanged a glance. "I think," Vincent said carefully, "that your son has spent so much time trying to become someone else that he's forgotten who he actually is. He's forgotten where he came from. And in forgetting that, he's forgotten to honor the person who got him there. Medical school changed him," I said. "Or maybe not changed him. Maybe it just revealed what was already there. All those rich kids from good families, and there was Evan, the scholarship kid whose dad was dead and whose mom was a nurse. He was ashamed. I could see it in his face when he introduced me at Parents' Weekend. He wanted a different mother. Someone who played tennis and wore pearls and said the right things at cocktail parties. Then he's a fool," Vincent said simply. "He's my son. That doesn't make him less of a fool." By the time we finished eating, it was after 10 o'clock. I was exhausted but also strangely energized, filled with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Gratitude, certainly, but also anger and sadness. And something else. A kind of awakening, maybe. A realization that I'd been accepting scraps when I deserved a full meal. "Thank you," I said to Vincent and Celine. "Thank you for tonight. For the food, yes, but more than that. For reminding me of who I used to be, who Michael thought I was." "You're still that person," Celine said, taking my hand. "She didn't go anywhere. She's just been very tired and very lonely and very underappreciated." Vincent walked me back through the kitchen, which was winding down for the night, and into the main dining room. It was nearly empty now, just a few stragglers finishing their wine. But I saw them immediately. Evan and Jessica still at their table, their faces tight and uncomfortable. They'd stayed. They'd sat there for 3 hours, waiting. Vincent saw them too. "Would you like me to call you a cab? You don't have to speak to them if you don't want to." I thought about it. It would be so easy to just leave, to avoid the confrontation, to go home and pretend none of this had happened. But I'd spent too many years avoiding confrontation, accepting disrespect, making myself small so that other people could feel big. "No," I said. "I'll talk to them." Vincent nodded. "I'll be right here if you need me." I walked toward their table, my heart pounding, my hands clenched at my sides. Evan and Jessica both stood up when they saw me coming. "Mom," Evan started, his voice urgent. "I need to talk to you." "No," I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected. "You need to listen." He blinked, surprised. I don't think I'd ever spoken to him like that before. "What you did tonight," I continued. "What you said to me in front of all those people, that was cruel, Evan. That was deliberately, unnecessarily cruel." "I know, I'm sorry. I'm not finished." I held up my hand. "I have spent 33 years putting you first. I worked double shifts so you could have new shoes for school. I went without so you could have everything. I never took a vacation. I never bought myself anything nice. I never even went on a date because I didn't want you to feel like you were being replaced. Everything I did, every choice I made was for you. I know that, Mom. I appreciate... Do you? Because tonight you told a room full of strangers that I don't deserve better than the cheapest thing on the menu. You told them that I'm not worth anything, and you did it on my birthday, Evan. My 62nd birthday." Jessica shifted uncomfortably. "Patricia, I think what Evan was trying to say..." "I'm not talking to you, Jessica." I didn't even look at her. "I'm talking to my son, the son I raised to be better than this." Evan's face was red, whether from embarrassment or anger I couldn't tell. "It was a joke, a stupid joke. I didn't mean..." "Yes, you did. You meant every word. Because this isn't the first time you've made me feel like an embarrassment. This isn't the first time you've talked about me like I'm something you have to manage or hide or apologize for. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked me how I was doing? Really asked, not just, 'How are you?' in passing? When was the last time you came to visit me, instead of making me come to you? When was the last time you introduced me to your colleagues without that little explanation about how I'm just a nurse or simple or from a different generation? Evan opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer. I've made excuses for you, I continued. I've told myself you're busy, that you're stressed, that you're just trying to fit in with Jessica's family and their world. But the truth is, you're ashamed of me. You're ashamed of where you came from. You're ashamed that your mother is a nurse who lives in a modest house in a working-class neighborhood. You want a different mother. Someone who plays tennis at the country club and wears designer clothes and knows which fork to use for the salad course. Mom, that's not true. Then what is true, Evan? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've spent the last 10 years trying to erase everything about your past that doesn't fit the image you're trying to create. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't wipe them away. Let him see what he'd done. Let him see the pain he'd caused. Your father would be so disappointed in you, I said, and my voice broke on the words. Michael would be heartbroken to see what you've become. That hit him. I saw it in his face, the way he flinched like I'd slapped him. Don't, he said quietly. Don't bring Dad into this. Why not? You're the one who dishonored his memory. You're the one who forgot everything he taught you about loyalty and respect and treating people with dignity, no matter who they are or where they came from. I said I'm sorry, Evan said, and now there were tears in his eyes too. What more do you want from me? I want you to mean it. I want you to understand why what you did was wrong, not just be sorry that you got caught. I want you to be the man your father believed you could be. Jessica put her hand on Evan's arm. Maybe we should all just calm down. Don't touch him, I said, my voice sharp. This is between me and my son. She pulled her hand back like she'd been burned. I looked at Evan one more time, memorizing his face. The face of the little boy I'd loved so desperately, now belonging to a man I didn't quite recognize. I'm going home, I said. Don't call me unless you have something real to say. Not apologies because you're embarrassed. Not excuses because Jessica's mother heard about what happened. Real words from a real person who actually understands what he did wrong. Mom! But I was already walking away, my head held high, past the remaining diners who quickly looked away, past Vincent who gave me an approving nod out into the cool October night. I found my car and sat in it for a long time, engine running, hands on the steering wheel, just breathing, letting the adrenaline fade, letting the reality of what I'd just done sink in. I'd stood up to my son. I'd told him the truth. I'd refused to accept his empty apology and his shallow excuses. And it felt terrible. But it also felt necessary. I drove home through empty streets, Charlotte's skyline receding in my rearview mirror. My phone buzzed with texts. From Evan, from Jessica, probably more apologies that didn't mean anything. I ignored them all. When I got home, the house felt different somehow. Or maybe I was different. I walked through the rooms, really looking at them for the first time in years. The worn couch where Michael used to fall asleep watching football. The kitchen table where Evan had done his homework. The photos on the walls. Evan as a baby. Evan's first day of school. Evan's high school graduation. Evan's medical school acceptance letter. My whole house was a shrine to my son. Where were the photos of me? Of Michael? Of the life we'd built before Evan was born? The dreams we'd had that didn't involve him? I found myself in my bedroom, standing in front of the closet. I opened it and looked at my clothes. Scrubs, mostly, and a few outdated dresses, and the navy sheath I'd worn tonight that was now rumpled and tear-stained. This was my life. This was what I'd become. A woman who owned nothing nice, who went nowhere special, who existed only in relation to other people. As a nurse, as a mother, as a widow. Who was Patricia Donnelly when she wasn't taking care of someone else? I didn't know. I genuinely didn't know. The phone rang. Not a text this time, but an actual call. I looked at the screen. Evan. I stared at it for a long moment, watching it ring and ring. Then I turned it off completely and set it on my nightstand. Tomorrow, I would deal with tomorrow. Tonight, I needed to sleep. I needed to process. I needed to figure out what came next. I changed into my pajamas, an old t-shirt and flannel pants, and climbed into bed. The sheets were cool and clean, and I pulled the blanket up to my chin the way I always did. But sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept replaying the night over and over. Evan's words, the laughter, Vincent's kindness, my own anger, finally expressed after years of swallowing it down. She doesn't deserve anything more than that. The words had cut so deep because they confirmed something I'd suspected for a long time but never wanted to admit. that my son saw me as less than, as inferior, as someone who existed only to serve him and then disappear gracefully when he no longer needed me. But Vincent had seen something different. Vincent had treated me like I mattered, like I was worth 7 courses and 2 hours of his time and a private dining room reserved for honored guests. Which version was true? Was I worthless or was I valuable? Was I an embarrassment or was I someone worth remembering? Maybe I was both. Maybe I'd been so focused on making Evan's life better that I'd forgotten to make my own life good. Maybe I'd poured everything into him until there was nothing left of me, and maybe that was my fault as much as his. I thought about what Vincent had said, about how Evan had forgotten where he came from. But I'd let him forget, hadn't I? I'd never demanded better treatment. I'd never set boundaries. I'd never said, no, that's not acceptable. I just accepted whatever scraps of affection he threw my way and told myself it was enough. It wasn't enough. It had never been enough. The clock on my nightstand said 12:47 a.m. Officially, my birthday was over. 62 years old. And this was what I had to show for it. A humiliating public scene, a son who didn't respect me, and a long, lonely night ahead. But also this, the memory of Vincent's kindness, the taste of that incredible meal, the feeling of standing up for myself finally, after years of being pushed down. That was something. That was a start. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't settle. It kept circling back to one question. What now? What came after you told your only child that he disappointed you? What came after you stopped accepting behavior that hurt you? What came after you started demanding better? I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't pretend tonight hadn't happened. I couldn't let Evan apologize his way out of this without any real change. Something had broken between us tonight, something fundamental. And I didn't know if it could be fixed. Maybe it couldn't be. Maybe some things, once broken, stayed broken. Maybe the best you could do was gather up the pieces and figure out how to build something new from what remained. I thought about Michael, about what he would say if he were here. He'd probably tell me to forgive Evan, to give him another chance, to remember that everyone makes mistakes. But he'd also tell me not to let anyone treat me like I didn't matter. He'd tell me that I deserved respect and kindness and love that didn't come with conditions. He'd tell me that I was worth more than the cheapest thing on the menu. I fell asleep sometime after 2 a.m., exhausted and emotionally drained, and I dreamed of Michael, young and alive and laughing, pulling me into his arms and telling me everything was going to be okay. But when I woke up the next morning, he was gone, and I was alone, and everything was decidedly not okay. The week that followed was strange and disorienting. Evan called repeatedly. So did Jessica. I didn't answer. They left voicemails that started out apologetic and gradually became more frustrated. Why wasn't I calling them back? Why was I being so difficult? Didn't I understand that Evan was sorry? But I wasn't ready to talk to them yet. I didn't trust myself to speak without either crying or screaming, and neither of those seemed productive. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into my shifts with renewed intensity, finding comfort in the familiar routines of patient care. Check vitals, administer medications, monitor IVs, change dressings, hold hands, offer reassurance. These were things I knew how to do. These were things that made sense. Denise knew something had happened at my birthday dinner, but she didn't push. She just brought me extra coffee and squeezed my shoulder when she walked past and made sure I took my breaks. You okay, honey? She asked on Friday afternoon, when we were both charting at the nurse's station. I will be, I said. Eventually. Was it Evan? I nodded. Men, she said, shaking her head. Even the ones we raised ourselves can be disappointing. That made me laugh, a small, bitter sound. That's one word for it. You want to talk about it? Not yet, but thank you. She patted my hand. When you're ready, I'm here. That evening, I came home to find a massive flower arrangement on my doorstep. Roses and lilies and things I didn't even know the names of, arranged in an expensive crystal vase. The card said, Mom, I'm so sorry. Please call me. Love, Evan. I brought them inside and set them on the kitchen table. They were beautiful. They were also meaningless. Flowers didn't change anything. Flowers didn't address the fundamental problem, which was that my son had publicly humiliated me and didn't seem to understand why that was wrong beyond the fact that he'd been caught. The next day, Saturday, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. I couldn't hide forever. I couldn't avoid Evan indefinitely. At some point, I would have to face him, to have the conversation we needed to have. But I wanted to do it on my terms, not his. I picked up my phone and called Vincent. He answered on the second ring. "Patricia," he said warmly. "I was hoping I'd hear from you. How are you?" "I'm okay. Better than I was. Thank you again for the other night. For everything. It was my honor. Truly." He paused. "Have you spoken to Evan?" "No. He's been calling, but I haven't been ready." "That's understandable. Take all the time you need. Actually, I was wondering if I could ask you for a favor. Anything. Could you meet me for coffee? There's something I want to talk to you about. Something about Michael." "Of course. When? Are you free this afternoon?" We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in South End, a trendy neighborhood I rarely visited. When I arrived, Vincent was already there, sitting at a small table near the window with 2 cups of coffee in front of him. "I remembered you take it with cream, no sugar," he said, sliding 1 cup toward me as I sat down. Good memory. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to hold on to. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the Saturday afternoon crowd, young couples pushing strollers, groups of friends laughing over brunch, joggers in expensive athletic wear stopping in for post-workout smoothies. "I've been thinking about Michael a lot this week," I said finally, "about what kind of man he was, about what he would think of all this." "He'd be proud of you," Vincent said immediately, "for standing up for yourself." "Would he?" "I keep thinking maybe he'd tell me I'm being too harsh, that Evan is still my son, that I should forgive him." Michael believed in forgiveness, but he also believed in accountability. He wouldn't want you to accept behavior that hurts you just to keep the peace. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the warmth spread through me. I realized something this week. I've been so focused on being Evan's mother that I forgot to be anything else. I forgot to be Michael's widow. I forgot to be Patricia. "It's easy to lose yourself in motherhood," Vincent said. "Celine struggled with that too when our girls were young. She felt like she'd disappeared, like she was just mom and nothing more. How did she find herself again? She started making jewelry. Little pieces at first, just for herself. Then friends started asking her to make things for them. Now she has a whole business. It's not about the money. It's about having something that's hers. Something that has nothing to do with being a wife or a mother. I don't know what that would be for me," I admitted. "I've been a nurse for so long, and a mother even longer. I don't know who I am outside of those roles." "Then maybe it's time to find out." We talked for over an hour, about Michael mostly, but also about life and choices and the ways we lose ourselves in the process of caring for other people. Vincent told me stories about his daughters, about their struggles and triumphs, about how hard it was to let them make their own mistakes. I told him about Evan's childhood, about the sweet, thoughtful boy he'd been, about the moment I'd first started to see the distance growing between us. "I think it started in medical school," I said. "He made this whole new group of friends, wealthy kids, connected kids, kids who'd never had to work for anything. And suddenly, I was an embarrassment. My job wasn't impressive enough. My house wasn't nice enough. My clothes weren't fashionable enough. I became something he had to apologize for." "Did you ever call him on it?" "No, I told myself he was just young, that he'd grow out of it. And then he married Jessica, and her family is so—" I trailed off, searching for the right word. "Pretentious?" Vincent offered. I laughed. I was going to say sophisticated, but pretentious works too. They treated me like I was some kind of curiosity. The working-class nurse who'd managed to raise a doctor all by herself. They'd ask me questions about my job like they were anthropologists studying a foreign culture. "And Evan didn't defend you?" "No, he played along. He'd make jokes about me being salt of the earth or the real backbone of America, like I was a character in a story about social mobility, not a real person." Vincent shook his head. "That must have hurt." "It did. It does. But I kept telling myself it didn't matter, as long as he was happy." "Your happiness matters too, Patricia." "Does it? I spent so many years putting everyone else first, Michael, Evan, my patients, that I'm not sure I remember what makes me happy. Then that's what you need to figure out." When we parted ways that afternoon, I felt lighter somehow, like sharing the burden had made it easier to carry. Vincent hugged me goodbye and made me promise to stay in touch, to not disappear back into my life of quiet endurance. "You deserve better than that," he said. "You always have." I drove home thinking about what he'd said, about finding out who I was outside of being a nurse and a mother. It was a frightening prospect. I'd been those things for so long that I didn't know how to be anything else. But maybe it was time to learn. Sunday morning, I woke up to the sound of someone knocking on my front door. Persistent, urgent knocking that wouldn't stop. I looked at the clock, 7:23 a.m., and felt a spike of anxiety. Who would be at my door this early? I pulled on my bathrobe and shuffled to the front door, peering through the peephole. Evan stood on my porch, looking disheveled in jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt. His hair was uncombed, his face unshaven. I'd never seen him look so undone. For a moment, I considered not opening the door. I wasn't ready for this. I didn't have the energy for another confrontation, but he was my son. No matter what he'd done, no matter how much he'd hurt me, he was still my son. I opened the door. "Mom?" His voice cracked on the word. "Thank God. I've been so worried. You haven't been answering your phone?" "It's 7:30 in the morning, Evan." "I know. I'm sorry, but I couldn't wait anymore. I needed to see you, to talk to you." He looked past me into the house. "Can I come in?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to close the door and go back to bed and pretend this wasn't happening. But I stepped aside and let him in. He walked into the living room, the same living room where he'd grown up, where he'd played video games and done homework and watched movies with me on Sunday afternoons. Now he stood in the middle of it looking lost, like a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong house. "Do you want coffee?" I asked because I didn't know what else to say. "No, I just want to talk. Please, Mom, just listen to me." I sat down on the couch, pulling my robe tighter around myself. Evan sat across from me in Michael's old recliner, the one I'd never been able to bring myself to get rid of. It swallowed him, made him look smaller somehow. "I'm listening," I said. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "I've been thinking about what you said. About Dad being disappointed in me, about how I've been treating you. And you're right, Mom. You're absolutely right." I didn't say anything. I just waited. "I've been an asshole," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been selfish and cruel, and I've taken you for granted. And I don't have a good excuse for it. I could blame medical school or work stress or Jessica's family, but the truth is, it's on me. I made those choices. I said those things. I treated you like you were less than, and that's unforgivable. So why did you do it?" I asked quietly. "Why, Evan? What did I do that made you ashamed of me?" "Nothing." He looked up at me, and there were tears streaming down his face. "You did nothing wrong. You were perfect. You are perfect. That's what makes this so much worse." "I don't understand." "I was scared," he said. "I was terrified that people would look at me and see the scholarship kid, the poor kid whose dad died in an accident, whose mom works as a nurse and lives in a small house in a bad neighborhood. I was afraid they'd see where I came from and decide I didn't belong. So you erased me." "I tried to. I thought if I could just distance myself enough, if I could create this new identity as someone who'd always been successful, always been comfortable, then no one would question whether I deserved to be there. And you," his voice broke, "you were evidence of everything I was trying to hide. Every time you showed up in your old dresses, every time you told stories about working double shifts, every time you were just yourself, kind and genuine and unpretentious, I felt like you were exposing me as a fraud." The words hung in the air between us. This was the truth, finally. This was what I'd suspected but never wanted to believe. "Jessica's family didn't help," he continued. "They made comments. Not mean ones, necessarily, but these little observations about how charming it was that you were so down to earth, how refreshing it was to meet someone so uncomplicated. And every time they said something like that, I felt this wave of shame. Not shame because of who you are, but shame because I was letting them talk about you that way. Shame because I didn't defend you the way I should have." "Why didn't you?" I asked. "Why didn't you tell them to stop?" "Because I wanted them to accept me more than I wanted to protect you. And that makes me the worst kind of son." I felt something shift inside me. This was different from his earlier apologies, which had been about embarrassment and social consequences. This was real. This was him seeing himself clearly and not liking what he saw. "What changed?" I asked. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw your face that night at the restaurant. When I said those words, when everyone laughed, I saw your face. And I saw what I'd done. I'd turned you into a punchline. I'd made you small so I could feel big. And in that moment, I saw Dad." "What do you mean?" I remembered something. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old and we were at the grocery store. This woman started giving the cashier a hard time, berating her for being too slow, calling her stupid, making a huge scene. And Dad stepped in. He told the woman that she was being rude, that the cashier was doing her best, that if she couldn't treat people with basic respect, then she should shop somewhere else. The woman was furious, but Dad didn't back down. And afterward, in the car, he told me something I've never forgotten. Evan paused, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. He said, "Evan, you judge a person's character by how they treat people who can't do anything for them. How you treat the cashier, the janitor, the waitress, that's who you really are. Not the face you show to your boss or your teachers or people you want to impress. The real you comes out when you think it doesn't matter." And I remember being so proud of him in that moment. Proud that my dad was someone who stood up for people. "He was a good man," I said softly. "He was. And I'm not." That night at the restaurant, I looked at you, and I realized that I'd become exactly what Dad would have despised. I'd become the person who treats others badly to make themselves feel superior. I'd become the person who looks down on the very people who helped them succeed. I'd become everything he taught me not to be. We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, I could hear my neighbor's dog barking, a car passing by, the ordinary sounds of a Sunday morning in my ordinary neighborhood. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," I said finally. "What you did hurt me more than you know. And hearing that you were ashamed of me, that you saw me as something to hide, that hurts even worse. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I appreciate you telling me the truth. I appreciate you being honest about why you did it, instead of just making excuses." Evan nodded, his head still bowed. "I need time," I continued. "I need space to figure out how I feel about all of this. And I need to see that you've actually changed, not just that you're sorry you got caught. Words are easy, Evan. Behavior is harder. Whatever you need, however long it takes." He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "I love you, Mom. I know I've done a terrible job of showing it, but I do love you. You're the strongest, most amazing person I know. And I'm sorry I ever made you feel like you were anything less than that." "I love you too," I said. And it was true, even through all the hurt and anger. "But love isn't enough. You need to respect me too. You need to value me for who I am, not who you wish I was." "I do. I will. I promise." He stood up to leave, and I walked him to the door. On the porch, he turned back to me. "One more thing," he said. "That restaurant owner, Vincent Laurent. How do you know him?" "He was your father's best friend, from the war." Evan's expression changed. "I didn't know Dad had any friends from the war. There's a lot you don't know about your father, a lot you never asked about. Will you tell me? Sometime, when you're ready? Will you tell me about Dad? The real stories, not just the ones I remember?" "Maybe," I said, "if you're willing to really listen." After Evan left, I stood in my doorway for a long time, watching his car disappear down the street. I felt exhausted, but also oddly relieved. The conversation I'd been dreading had happened, and I'd survived it. More than survived it. I'd held my ground. I'd demanded better. I'd refused to accept a shallow apology. That was something. That was growth. The next few weeks were strange. Evan called regularly. Not excessively, but consistently. He didn't push for more than I was willing to give. He didn't demand forgiveness or try to rush my healing. He just checked in, asked how I was doing, shared small details about his day. One afternoon, he called to tell me that he'd had lunch with Vincent. My heart stuttered in my chest. "You did?" "Yeah." I went back to Le Rousseau and asked if I could speak with him. I wanted to apologize for what happened, and I wanted to hear about Dad. He was nice about it. Nicer than I deserved. "What did he tell you?" "He told me about Iraq, about the IED that nearly killed him, about how Dad pulled him out of the burning vehicle, about how Dad visited him every day when he was in the hospital, how Dad gave him money to start his restaurant. He showed me a picture of them together, both of them so young." Evan's voice got thick. "I never knew any of that, Mom. Why didn't you tell me?" "You never asked." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You're right," he said finally. "I never asked. I was so busy trying to move forward that I never looked back. I never tried to understand where I came from or what was sacrificed to get me where I am. Your father would have wanted you to be successful," I said, "but he would have wanted you to be kind even more." "I know." Vincent said the same thing. After we hung up, I sat with my coffee and thought about Michael. I thought about the man he'd been, generous and loyal and fundamentally decent. He'd never had much money, but he'd shared what he had. He'd never been formally educated, but he'd been wise in the ways that mattered. He'd loved deeply and laughed easily and worked hard and treated everyone with respect. That was the legacy he'd left. Not money or property or social status, but an example of how to be human. And somehow, in raising Evan, I'd failed to pass that on. Or maybe I hadn't failed. Maybe Evan had just needed to lose his way for a while before he could find it again. That evening, Denise called me. "Girl, what are you doing right now?" "Nothing. Watching TV." "Why?" "Because we're going out. I'm picking you up in 20 minutes. "Going where?" "You'll see. Wear something other than scrubs." Before I could protest, she hung up. True to her word, Denise showed up 20 minutes later in her sensible sedan, honking the horn until I came outside. I'd changed into jeans and a sweater, the most casual outfit I owned that wasn't work-related. "Where are we going?" I asked as I climbed into the passenger seat. "You've been moping around for 3 weeks," Denise said, pulling away from the curb. "It's time to remind you that you're alive, and that life is short, and that you need to have some fun before you die." That's very dramatic. I'm a dramatic person. Deal with it. She drove us to a paint and sip place in Plaza Midwood, one of those studios where they give you wine and teach you how to paint. I'd never been to anything like it before. "I can't paint," I protested as we walked in. "Nobody can paint. That's the point. We're all going to make terrible art and laugh about it and drink mediocre wine and have a good time. Now stop complaining and pick a canvas." The class was full of women, mostly middle-aged, mostly laughing and chatting, and clearly there more for the social aspect than the art. The instructor was a cheerful young woman with purple hair who kept insisting that there were no mistakes, only happy accidents. I was terrible at it. My tree looked like a deformed broccoli, my sky was streaky and uneven, and my little house looked more like a shed on the verge of collapse. But Denise was right. It was fun. Absurdly, ridiculously fun. "When was the last time you did something like this?" Denise asked, sipping her wine and examining my painting with mock seriousness. "Like what?" "Something just for you. Something that had nothing to do with work or Evan or taking care of other people." I thought about it. I honestly can't remember. That's what I thought. You've spent so long being everyone else's person that you forgot how to be your own person. Vincent said something similar. "Vincent is a smart man. You should listen to him." She paused. "Are you going to tell me what happened with Evan?" I hadn't told her the full story yet. I'd told her that there was a conflict, that I needed space, but not the details. Now, in this room full of strangers painting cheerful landscapes, I found myself telling her everything. The restaurant, Evan's words, Vincent's intervention, the confrontation afterward, Evan's apology. Denise listened without interrupting, her paintbrush suspended in midair. "Jesus," she said when I finished. "Patricia, I am so sorry. I had no idea it was that bad." I didn't either, really. Or maybe I did, but I didn't want to admit it. "Are you going to forgive him?" "Eventually, I think. But not yet. Not until I'm sure he really understands what he did wrong." "Good for you. Setting boundaries isn't something you're good at, so I'm proud of you for doing it now." I looked at her in surprise. "You think I'm bad at boundaries?" "Honey, you're terrible at boundaries. You work double shifts when you're exhausted. You stay late when other people call out sick. You give and give and give until there's nothing left of you. And then you wonder why people take advantage. I'm just trying to help." "I know, and that's beautiful. But you can't pour from an empty cup, and yours has been bone dry for years." Her words settled over me, uncomfortable but true. I had been running on empty. I'd been so focused on being useful, on being needed, that I'd forgotten to make sure I was okay. We finished our paintings. Denise's was actually pretty good, mine was still a disaster, and the instructor had us all hold them up for a group photo. Looking at the picture later, I was struck by my own smile. It was genuine, unforced. The smile of someone who was actually happy, not just pretending to be. When was the last time I'd smiled like that? Over the next month, things slowly began to shift. Evan continued to call, but our conversations were different now. He asked questions about my work, really listened to my answers, shared stories about his own patients that showed he was thinking about what I'd said. He started coming by the house for coffee on Sunday mornings, just the two of us, no Jessica, no agenda. We talked about Michael, about Evan's childhood, about the distance that had grown between us. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I felt my anger flare up again, when something he said reminded me of the hurt he'd caused. But there were also moments of genuine connection, glimpses of the boy I'd raised, the man he was trying to become. Jessica was another matter. She'd sent flowers and cards and even a handwritten letter apologizing for her behavior at the restaurant. But I could tell her heart wasn't in it. She was going through the motions because Evan had asked her to, not because she actually understood what she'd done wrong. I accepted her apology but kept my distance. Some relationships weren't worth salvaging. At work, I found myself paying more attention to my own needs. When my shift ended, I left. No more staying late to help with admissions. No more volunteering for extra shifts. I started taking my full lunch break instead of eating at my desk while doing paperwork. I joined Denise and some of the other nurses for happy hour on Friday evenings, something I'd been invited to dozens of times but always declined. "Look at you," Denise said one Friday night as we sat in a booth at a sports bar in Dilworth. "Living your life like a real person." "I'm still not sure what I'm doing," I admitted. "I feel like I'm figuring out who I am for the first time at 62 years old. Better late than never. Besides, who says we're supposed to have it all figured out by a certain age? Life is long. You're allowed to grow and change." In November, Vincent and Celine invited me to have Thanksgiving dinner with them and their daughters. Evan had invited me too, but Jessica's family was hosting, and I couldn't face an entire day of forced small talk with people who looked down on me. So I accepted Vincent's invitation instead. Their home was beautiful, a renovated bungalow in Dilworth with a gourmet kitchen and a garden full of herbs. Their daughters, Sophie and Marie, were warm and welcoming, asking me questions about nursing and telling me stories about their father that made him blush. "Did you know," Sophie said, refilling my wine glass, "that Dad keeps a photo of your husband in his office at the restaurant?" "I knew about the one in the private dining room," I said. "No, there's another one. Just the two of them at Dad's wedding. They're both in tuxedos and they look so young and happy. He looks at it every day." I felt my throat tighten. I didn't know that. "Michael was important to me," Vincent said quietly from across the table. "He saved my life in more ways than one. Keeping his memory alive is the least I can do." After dinner, while Celine and the girls were in the kitchen arguing over whether to have pie or cake first, why not both? Vincent and I sat in his study, a cozy room lined with cookbooks and framed photos. "How are things with Evan?" he asked. "Better. Not perfect, but better. We're talking at least. Really talking." "That's good. That's a start. He told me about having lunch with you. Thank you for meeting with him. You didn't have to do that. He's Michael's son. Of course I met with him." Vincent paused. "He asked me a lot of questions about his father. Things he should have known but didn't. I think he's realizing how much he missed, how much he let slip away while he was busy trying to become someone else. We all do that, to some degree. We spend our youth running from where we came from, and then we spend our middle age trying to get back to it." Vincent smiled ruefully. "It's the human condition. Do you think he's really changed, or is he just doing what I want to see?" "I think he's trying. Whether the trying becomes lasting change, that's up to him. But I see something in him that wasn't there before. A humility. An awareness of his own capacity for cruelty. That's not nothing." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the laughter from the kitchen. "You know what I'm grateful for this year?" Vincent said. "That you walked into my restaurant that night. That I had the chance to repay even a fraction of what Michael did for me. That I got to see you stand up for yourself and remember your own worth. I'm not sure I've fully remembered it yet," I admitted. "But I'm working on it. That's all any of us can do. Work on it, day by day, until it becomes who we are." On the drive home that night, full of good food and better company, I thought about what Vincent had said. About working on yourself day by day until it becomes who you are. About finding your way back to the person you were meant to be. I'd spent 33 years being Evan's mother. And before that, I'd been Michael's wife. And underneath all of that, I'd been a nurse, a caretaker, someone who existed to serve other people's needs. Who was Patricia Donnelly when she wasn't defined by her relationships to others? I was starting to find out. December arrived with its usual chaos. Holiday parties at the hospital, strings of lights going up in my neighborhood, Christmas music playing in every store. Evan called to ask if I wanted to come to his house for Christmas. "Jessica's family is going to Colorado," he said, "so it would just be us. I could cook. Or we could order in. Whatever you want." I thought about it. Christmas had always been hard since Michael died. Evan and I used to spend it together when he was younger, but once he got married, he'd started alternating years between my house and Jessica's family's house. Last year, they'd gone to her parents' place, and I'd spent Christmas alone, watching old movies and eating Chinese takeout. "I'll think about it," I told him. "Okay, no pressure. But I'd really like to see you. And I promise, no Jessica, no agenda, No strings attached. Just you and me. A week later, I was doing my grocery shopping at Harris Teeter when I ran into someone I hadn't seen in months. Dr. Rebecca Marsh, one of the cardiologists Evan worked with. She was young and brilliant and had always been kind to me on the few occasions we'd met. "Mrs. Donnelly," she said, her face lighting up. "How are you?" "I'm well, thank you. How are you?" "Good, good. Listen, I wanted to tell you, I don't know if Evan mentioned this, but he's been different lately. Better, I mean. More present with patients, more willing to take time to explain things. He actually stayed late last week to sit with a patient's family while they made end-of-life decisions. The old Evan would have just handed that off to a resident." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. That's good to hear. I don't know what happened, but whatever it was, it changed him. And I just thought you should know that. Sometimes we don't see the impact we have on people, you know? After she walked away, I stood there in the cereal aisle staring at the rows of colorful boxes, feeling something shift inside me. Maybe Evan really was changing. Maybe the apology had been real. Maybe the work he was doing on himself was actually making a difference. That evening, I called him. "I'd like to spend Christmas with you," I said. "If the offer is still open." "Really?" He sounded almost disbelieving. "Yes, of course. Absolutely. Just us. No Jessica, no anyone else. Just you and me. Deal. I'll cook. I've been practicing." "You've been practicing cooking?" "Well, I've been watching YouTube videos, and I called Vincent and asked for some advice. So I'm not promising anything amazing, but it'll be edible." I laughed, a real laugh that came from somewhere deep in my chest. "Okay, Evan, I'll take my chances." Christmas Day arrived cold and clear. I drove to Evan's house in Myers Park, the neighborhood I'd once felt so intimidated by. The house was smaller than I remembered. A nice house, certainly, but not the mansion it had seemed in my imagination. Just a house where my son lived. Evan answered the door wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the cook," and holding a wooden spoon. His hair was disheveled and there was flour on his cheek. "I'm in over my head," he admitted. "The turkey is taking forever and I think I messed up the stuffing and I'm not sure the green beans are supposed to be this color." "Let me help," I said, taking off my coat. "No, you're the guest. You sit down and relax." "Evan, I've been cooking Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners for 35 years. Let me help you." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but only because I'm desperate." We spent the next 2 hours in the kitchen together, me giving instructions, Evan following them with intense concentration. He'd bought too much food, chosen recipes that were too complicated, and started cooking everything too late. But he'd tried. He'd really tried. "When did you decide to do all this?" I asked, basting the turkey while he mashed potatoes. "A few weeks ago. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I cooked for you. You always cooked for me, for my entire life. And I wanted to do something for you for once. You don't have to prove anything to me, you know." "I know, but I want to. I want to show you that I'm different now, that I'm trying to be the kind of son you deserve." We ate in his dining room, the same dining room where I'd felt so out of place at previous holiday gatherings. But today it felt different. Today it felt comfortable. The food was good. Not perfect, but good. And the conversation flowed easily. Evan told me about work, about the patients he was treating, about a young woman with a heart condition who reminded him of me in some way he couldn't quite articulate. "She's raising 3 kids on her own," he said, working 2 jobs, doing everything herself. And she kept apologizing for taking up my time like her health didn't matter. It made me think of you, of how many times you've probably apologized for things you didn't need to apologize for. "Too many to count," I admitted. "That stops now. No more apologizing for existing. No more making yourself small so other people can feel big. I'm working on it. I know you are. And I'm proud of you." Those words, "I'm proud of you," hit me harder than I expected. When was the last time someone had said that to me? When was the last time someone had acknowledged that I was doing something difficult and doing it well? After dinner, we sat in his living room with coffee and pie, and Evan pulled out a box I hadn't noticed before. "I found this in the attic," he said, setting it on the coffee table between us. "It's Dad's stuff, things from before I was born or when I was too young to remember." Inside were photographs, Michael in his military uniform, Michael and me on our wedding day, Michael holding baby Evan in the hospital. There were letters he'd written from Iraq, postcards from places he'd been, a journal I didn't know he'd kept. We spent the rest of the evening going through it together, and I told Evan stories he'd never heard. About how Michael and I met at a county fair, how he'd won me a stuffed bear by throwing baseballs at milk bottles, how he'd proposed on the Ferris wheel because he said he wanted us to be on top of the world, about the early years of our marriage when we were broke and happy, living in a tiny apartment and dreaming of the life we'd build together. "He sounds amazing," Evan said, his voice thick with emotion. He was. He really was. I wish I remembered him better. I have these fragments, his laugh, the way he smelled like sawdust and aftershave, how he used to let me stand on his feet while we danced. But I don't have the full picture. Not the way you do. "He's in you," I said. "The good parts of you, the parts that want to help people, the parts that are capable of growth and change, those come from him." "I hope so. Because if they do, maybe there's hope for me yet." As I drove home that night, I thought about the day. About the imperfect meal and the easy conversation and the shared memories of a man we'd both loved. It wasn't a perfect Christmas, but it was a real one, an honest one, and that was better than perfect. The new year came quietly. I didn't make resolutions. I'd never been good at keeping them. But I did make a decision. I was going to start living for myself, not just for other people. In January, I signed up for a watercolor class at the local community college. In February, I joined a book club that Denise had been trying to get me to join for years. In March, I started volunteering at a free clinic once a week, using my nursing skills to help people who couldn't afford regular health care. These were small things, but they felt significant. They felt like building blocks of a new life, or maybe an old life rediscovered. Evan and I saw each other regularly. Sunday morning coffee had become our routine. Sometimes we talked about important things. Sometimes we just talked about nothing. The key was that we talked. Really talked, the way we hadn't in years. One Sunday in April, he showed up at my house with news. "Jessica and I are separating," he said. I set down my coffee cup. "What happened?" "Nothing dramatic. No affair. No big blow-up. We just realized we don't actually like each other very much. We got married for the wrong reasons, because it looked good on paper, because our careers aligned, because it was what people expected. But we don't make each other happy. I'm sorry, Evan. Don't be. It's the right decision. We've both known it for a while." He paused. "She said something interesting when we were talking about it. She said I'd changed, that I wasn't the man she married anymore. And I realized she was right. I'm not that man anymore, and I don't want to be." "Who do you want to be?" "Someone Dad would be proud of. Someone who treats people with respect. Someone who doesn't forget where he came from." He looked at me. "Someone more like you." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me." "It's true. You're the strongest person I know, Mom. You always have been. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." We sat in comfortable silence, sipping our coffee, watching the morning sun stream through my kitchen window. "So what now?" I asked. "Now I figure out how to be on my own. How to be Evan Donnelly, not Evan Donnelly, the successful cardiologist with the perfect wife and the perfect life. Just Evan. That sounds lonely. Maybe, but maybe it's necessary. Maybe I need to spend some time being uncomfortable before I can figure out who I really am." I understood that better than he knew. In May, on what would have been Michael's 67th birthday, Evan and I went to the cemetery together. We hadn't done that in years. I usually went alone on anniversaries and birthdays, leaving flowers and having one-sided conversations with a headstone. But this year, Evan asked if he could come with me. We stood side by side in front of the grave, looking at Michael's name carved in granite. Michael James Donnelly, beloved husband and father. 1958-2001. "I'm sorry, Dad," Evan said quietly. "I'm sorry I forgot who you were. I'm sorry I forgot what you taught me. I'm sorry I let you down." I took his hand and squeezed it. "But I'm trying now," Evan continued. "I'm trying to be better, to be the kind of man you were, to honor you the way I should have all along." We stayed there for a long time, the two of us standing in the spring sunshine, remembering a man who had loved us both completely. On the drive home, Evan said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy? Really, truly happy?" I thought about the question. Was I happy? Not in the uncomplicated way of someone who'd never been hurt or disappointed, but in the deeper way of someone who'd survived pain and come out stronger on the other side, who'd learned to set boundaries and demand respect, and build a life that was hers, not just a reflection of other people's needs. "Yes," I said. "I think I am. Or at least, I'm working on it." "Good. You deserve to be happy." "So do you, Evan. I'm working on it too." That summer, Vincent and Celine invited me to France. They were going to Lyon to visit Vincent's family, and they wanted me to come with them. I'd never been to Europe. I'd barely been out of North Carolina. I can't afford that, I told Vincent when he first suggested it. It's our treat. Consider it a very late thank you for everything you and Michael did for me all those years ago. That's too much, Patricia. He cut me off gently. Let someone do something nice for you. Please. It would mean a lot to us. So I went. I took 2 weeks off work, the longest vacation I'd ever taken, and flew to France with Vincent and Celine. Lyon was beautiful. The food was incredible. The wine was better than anything I'd ever tasted. But more than that, it was the experience of being somewhere completely foreign, of being challenged and delighted and occasionally overwhelmed by a world so different from the one I'd always known. Celine took me shopping and bought me clothes that actually fit properly and made me feel pretty. Vincent took me to markets and taught me how to pick the ripest fruit, the freshest fish. We ate at tiny bistros and grand restaurants and everything in between. You're different here, Celine observed one evening as we sat at a cafe in the old town, watching people stroll past in the golden evening light. Different how? Lighter, more relaxed, like you're finally allowing yourself to enjoy life instead of just surviving it. She was right. In France, I wasn't Patricia the nurse or Patricia the mother. I was just Patricia, a woman experiencing beautiful things for the first time. I ate croissants without counting calories. I drank wine in the afternoon without feeling guilty. I laughed freely and often, without worrying about whether it was appropriate or too loud. On our last night in Lyon, Vincent made a special dinner for us at his family's home, a beautiful stone house on the outskirts of the city. His mother was there, a tiny woman in her 80s who spoke no English but hugged me like I was family. His brothers came with their wives and children, and the house filled with French conversation and laughter and the smells of incredible food. After dinner, Vincent's mother pulled out a photograph album. She showed me pictures of Vincent as a boy, Vincent in his military uniform, Vincent opening his first restaurant in Lyon before he came to America. And then she showed me a picture I hadn't seen before. Michael and Vincent together, sitting at this very table, both of them young and grinning at the camera. Michael, she said, pointing at the picture and then at her heart. Bon homme. Good man. Yes, I said, tears streaming down my face. Very good man. She took my hand and said something in French that I didn't understand. Vincent translated. She says Michael sent you to us. She says he wanted to make sure someone was taking care of you, the way you took care of everyone else. I couldn't speak. I just held this woman's hand and she cried with me, and somehow, across language and culture and everything that separated us, we understood each other perfectly. When I returned to Charlotte in late July, Evan picked me up from the airport. He barely recognized me at first. I'd cut my hair shorter. Celine had convinced me to try highlights, and I was wearing one of the new dresses she'd bought me, a simple blue cotton dress that actually fit my body instead of hiding it. Mom, he stared at me. You look different. Different good or different bad. Different amazing. You look happy. I am happy, I said, and I meant it. Over coffee at my house, I'd insisted we go there instead of to a restaurant, wanting to be in my own space. I showed him pictures from France and told him stories about the trip. He listened intently, smiling at the right moments, asking questions that showed he was really paying attention. I'm jealous, he admitted. I've never taken a trip like that. Never just gone somewhere for the experience of it. You should. Life is short, Evan. Your father taught me that, though it took me a long time to really understand it. Maybe I will. Maybe after the divorce is finalized, I'll take some time off. Go somewhere I've always wanted to see. Where would you go? Ireland, maybe. That's where Dad's family was from, right? I'd like to see it. Try to understand that part of who I am. Your father would love that. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Evan said, I've been thinking about something. About that night at the restaurant. My body tensed automatically. We hadn't talked about that night in months. I'd thought we'd moved past it. I know I apologized, he continued, and I meant it, but I don't think I ever really explained what was going through my head, why I said what I said. You don't have to. I want to. I need to. He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. I was angry that night. Not at you, at myself. Jessica had been on my case all week about money, about how I needed to work more hours, take on more private patients, build the practice faster. Her father had made some comment about how I was never going to be truly successful if I kept spending so much time on charity cases. And I was exhausted, Mom. exhausted from trying to be the man they wanted me to be, exhausted from pretending I belonged in their world. So you took it out on me. Yes, and that's unforgivable. I saw you sitting there in your old dress being so grateful for something as simple as dinner at a nice restaurant, and I felt this surge of anger. Not at you, but at the situation. At the fact that you'd given me everything and I'd given you nothing in return. At the fact that you were still working so hard while I had everything, and it still wasn't enough for the people I was trying to impress. That doesn't make it okay. I know it doesn't. But I want you to understand that when I said those words, I wasn't really talking about you. I was talking about myself. I was saying out loud what I believed about myself. That I didn't deserve anything. That I was a fraud. That I was the cheap thing that didn't belong on the menu. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. And in trying to distance myself from that feeling, I hurt the one person who'd never made me feel that way. The one person who'd always believed I was good enough exactly as I was. I reached across the table and took his hand. I forgive you, Evan. I forgave you months ago. But I needed you to understand that what you did had consequences. That you couldn't just apologize and expect everything to go back to the way it was. I know, and I'm grateful that you gave me the chance to prove I could change. Not everyone would have done that. You're my son. I'll always give you chances to be better. That's what mothers do. Even when we don't deserve it, especially then. In September, on my 63rd birthday, Evan took me back to La Rousseau. I was nervous about returning to the place where I'd been so humiliated, but he insisted. We're going to replace that memory with a good one, he said. Together. This time, when we walked in, I was wearing one of my new dresses from France. This time, I held my head high. This time, when the hostess led us to our table, a small, intimate table in the corner, not the center of the room, I felt like I belonged. Vincent came out of the kitchen personally to greet us. He embraced me warmly, kissed both my cheeks in the French way, and shook Evan's hand. Mrs. Donnelly, he said, you look radiant. France agreed with you. France was wonderful. Thank you again for taking me. The pleasure was ours. You must come back next summer. Celine is already planning the itinerary. He turned to Evan. Dr. Donnelly, I'm glad to see you here. I'm glad you're the kind of man who can return to the scene of his mistakes and try to do better. Evan nodded. I'm trying, sir, every day. Vincent brought us wine. A beautiful Burgundy, he said, was from a vineyard near his mother's house. He told us about the specials, recommending dishes with genuine enthusiasm. When he left, Evan raised his glass. To you, Mom. To the strongest, most amazing woman I know. To the second chances you've given me that I didn't deserve. And to Dad, who's watching over us both and probably shaking his head at what an idiot I've been. I laughed through my tears. To your father, and to us, and to figuring out who we are even when it takes longer than we expected. We clinked glasses, and I took a sip of wine that tasted like sunshine and earth and possibility. The meal was extraordinary, course after course of beautiful food, each one more delicious than the last. We talked and laughed and shared memories of Michael, of Evan's childhood, of the life we'd built together and the separate lives we were building now. When dessert came, a delicate chocolate creation that looked almost too beautiful to eat, there was a card on the plate. I opened it. Inside, in Evan's handwriting, was a simple message. Mom, thank you for never giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. I love you more than I could ever express. Happy birthday. I looked up at him, tears streaming down my face for what felt like the 100th time that year. I love you too, I said, and I'm so proud of the man you're becoming. I'm still a work in progress. We all are. That's the point. When we left the restaurant that night, walking out into the cool September air, I realized something important. The humiliation I'd felt in this place a year ago had lost its power. It was just a memory now, a painful moment that had led to necessary changes. It didn't define me anymore. What defined me was this. I was Patricia Donnelly, 63 years old, a nurse, a widow, a mother, a friend. I was a woman who'd survived loss and disappointment and betrayal. I was a woman who'd learned to stand up for herself, to demand respect, to build a life that was hers alone. I was enough. I had always been enough. And finally, I believed it. In October, Denise and I had lunch at a little cafe near the hospital. She looked at me over her chicken salad and shook her head. Girl, I don't know what happened to you in the past year, but whatever it was, I want some of it. What do you mean? You're different. You're lighter, like you've been carrying a weight for years and you finally put it down. You smile more. You laugh more. You say no when you need to say no. You're actually living your life instead of just surviving it. I had a very public wake-up call, I said. It forced me to look at things I'd been avoiding for a long time. Well, it looks good on you. Really good. Thank you, I feel good. Better than I have in years. Are you and Evan okay now? We're getting there. It's not perfect, but it's real. And that's better than the fake relationship we had before, where we both pretended everything was fine when it wasn't. Amen to that. Denise raised her iced tea glass. To real relationships and second chances. And to friends who stick around even when things get messy. Always, honey. Always. In November, I got a call from the nursing director at the hospital. She wanted to know if I'd be interested in a new position, coordinator for the hospital's community outreach program. It would mean fewer patient care hours and more administrative work, organizing health fairs and free clinics and educational programs for underserved populations. It comes with a raise, she said, and more regular hours. No more night shifts, no more double shifts. I know you've been doing this a long time, Patricia, and you've been an incredible nurse. But I also know you're not getting any younger, and this might be a good transition for you. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say no, wanted to keep doing what I'd always done. But another part, the part that was learning to take care of herself, recognized this as an opportunity. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course. Take your time. That night, I called Evan and told him about the offer. What do you want to do? He asked. I don't know. Part of me feels like I'd be abandoning my patients if I took a desk job. But part of me is so tired, Evan. So tired of the physical demands of floor nursing. My knees hurt. My back hurts. I can't keep up the way I used to. Then take the job, Mom. You've spent 40 years taking care of other people. It's okay to take care of yourself now. You really think so? I really do. And Dad would too. He wouldn't want you to work yourself into the ground out of some misguided sense of duty. He'd want you to be happy and healthy and have energy left over to actually enjoy your life. He was right. I knew he was right. I took the job. My last shift on the floor was in December. The staff threw me a party in the break room, cake and balloons and a gift certificate to a spa that made me laugh because I'd never been to a spa in my life. You have to go, Denise insisted. You have to use it. Get a massage, get a facial, get your nails done. Do something nice for yourself for once. I will, I promise. I'm going to hold you to that. As I cleaned out my locker that last day, pulling out old photos and forgotten name badges and dried up pens, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness at leaving something I'd done for so long, relief at not having to do it anymore, excitement about what came next. Change was hard, but it was also necessary. My first day in my new position, I arrived at the hospital in business casual clothes instead of scrubs. Slacks and a blouse, comfortable shoes that were actually cute instead of just functional. I had my own office, a small space with a window overlooking the parking lot, but it was mine. I had a desk and a computer and a phone and a calendar that I was responsible for filling with events that would help people. It felt strange, but it also felt right. Over the next few months, I threw myself into the work. I organized health fairs at community centers. I set up free blood pressure screenings at churches. I coordinated with local doctors to offer reduced-cost care for people without insurance. I created educational programs about diabetes and heart health and nutrition. I was still helping people, just in a different way, and I loved it. Christmas that year was quiet. Evan and I spent it at my house, cooking together the way we had the year before, but this time with less stress and more laughter. He'd gotten better at cooking, or at least better at following recipes. Jessica had moved to Atlanta for a new job, and the divorce had been finalized in November. Evan seemed lighter without her, more himself. He'd started playing guitar again, something he'd given up in medical school because there wasn't time. He'd joined a recreational basketball league. He'd even started volunteering at the free clinic where I organized health fairs. I like it, he said when I asked him about it. It reminds me why I became a doctor in the first place, not for the money or the prestige, but to help people. Your father would be so proud of you. I hope so. I'm trying to be the kind of man he was. It's harder than it looks. Everything worthwhile is hard. We spent Christmas afternoon going through more of Michael's things, boxes I'd stored in the attic and hadn't looked at in years. We found letters he'd written to me when he was deployed, love letters that made us both cry. We found his old tools, each one worn smooth from years of use. We found a journal where he'd written down advice for Evan, things he wanted his son to know if he didn't make it back from Iraq. Evan read it with tears streaming down his face. "Listen to this," he said, his voice breaking. "Evan, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But I want you to know some things. First, take care of your mother. She's the strongest person I've ever known, but she'll need you. Don't let her work herself to death. Make sure she takes time for herself. Make sure she knows she's loved. Second, don't chase money or status. Chase meaning. Do work that matters. Help people who need it. Be kind to everyone, especially people who can't do anything for you. That's how you measure a man. Not by how much he has, but by how much he gives." He looked up at me. "I failed him, Mom. I did the exact opposite of everything he asked. But you figured it out eventually. That's what matters. It took me too long. I wasted so many years being someone I'm not. We all waste time, Evan. The key is recognizing it and choosing to do better, which is exactly what you've done." He hugged me then, a long, tight hug that reminded me of when he was little, when I was his whole world and he was mine. "I love you, Mom," he whispered. "And I'm sorry for all the time I wasted not showing it. I love you too. And we have time now. We have all the time in the world." In February, Vincent called to tell me that he and Celine had decided to open a cooking school in Charlotte. They wanted to teach people, especially people from working-class backgrounds, how to cook good food on a budget, how to turn simple ingredients into something special. "We want you to help us," he said. "We want you to be part of it. You could teach a class on nutrition, on how to eat healthy when you're working long hours and don't have much money. You've lived that life. You know what it's like." "I don't know anything about teaching. You're a nurse. You've been teaching patients for 40 years. This is just a different classroom." I thought about it. It sounded terrifying. It also sounded wonderful. "Okay," I said. "I'll do it." The cooking school opened in April. It was in a renovated warehouse in Noda, with big windows and industrial lighting and gleaming stainless steel appliances. On opening day, 50 people showed up. Single mothers, working-class families, college students, elderly people on fixed incomes. All of them eager to learn. Vincent taught them how to roast a chicken. Celine taught them how to make a simple vinaigrette. And I taught them about nutrition, not in a preachy way, but in a practical way. How to read labels, how to make a week's worth of meals from $10 of ingredients, how to feed yourself and your family well, even when you're exhausted and broke. People listened, they asked questions, they took notes. And at the end of the day, when they left with full stomachs and new skills and a sense of accomplishment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Real, genuine pride in work I was doing. In May, on what would have been Michael's 68th birthday, Evan and I went to the cemetery again. But this time, we brought Vincent and Celine with us. The four of us stood around Michael's grave, telling stories, laughing and crying, remembering a man who had touched all our lives in profound ways. "He'd be so happy to see all of us together," Vincent said. "This is what he would have wanted. People he loved, supporting each other, carrying on his legacy of kindness." "He'd also probably make fun of my cooking," Evan said, which made us all laugh. "He definitely would," I agreed. "But he'd also tell you he was proud of you. Because you're trying. Because you're growing. Because you're becoming the man he hoped you'd be." After they left, Evan and I stayed a little longer. Just the two of us. "Do you think he knows?" Evan asked. "Do you think he can see us? See how we're doing?" "I think if love survives death, and I believe it does, then yes, he knows. He sees you becoming a better man. He sees me learning to take care of myself. He sees us figuring out how to be mother and son in a way that's healthy and real. And he's proud of us. I hope so. I really hope so." We stood in silence for a while, listening to birds singing in nearby trees, feeling the warm May sunshine on our faces. "Mom," Evan said finally, "thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For setting boundaries even when it was hard. For showing me that love doesn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior. For teaching me by example that it's never too late to change. You did the hard work yourself, sweetheart. I just held the line until you were ready to do it. Still, thank you." On my 64th birthday that September, I woke up in my small house in Northeast Charlotte, the same house I'd lived in for 34 years, and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Contentment. Not happiness in the fleeting, circumstantial way, but deep, abiding contentment. The sense that my life, imperfect as it was exactly what it should be. I'd spent 63 years taking care of other people. And in the last year, I'd finally learned to take care of myself too, to set boundaries, to demand respect, to build a life that was mine, not just a reflection of other people's needs. I'd learned that being a good mother didn't mean accepting bad behavior from my son, that forgiveness didn't require forgetting, that loving someone meant holding them accountable when they hurt you. I'd learned that it was never too late to change, to grow, to become who you were always meant to be. My phone buzzed with birthday messages, from Evan, from Denise, from Vincent and Celine, from colleagues at work, from people in my book club and my watercolor class. People who saw me, who valued me, who appreciated me for who I was. I thought about that night at Le Rousseau 14 months ago. The worst moment of my life had become the catalyst for the best year of my life. The humiliation had forced me to look at truths I'd been avoiding. The pain had pushed me to demand better. Sometimes you have to break before you can rebuild. That evening, Evan picked me up for dinner. Not at Le Rousseau this time. We'd agreed we didn't need grand gestures anymore. Just a small Italian place we both liked, with red checkered tablecloths and bread that came warm from the oven. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, handing me a small wrapped box across the table. Inside was a necklace, a simple silver pendant with an engraved quote, "She believed she could, so she did." "It's perfect," I said, tears in my eyes. "You taught me that," Evan said. "That belief in yourself, that determination to keep going even when things are hard. That's all you. And I wanted you to have something that reminded you of your own strength." I put it on right there at the table, and it felt like a promise. A promise to myself that I would never again let anyone make me feel less than, that I would never again accept crumbs when I deserved a feast, that I would never again apologize for taking up space in the world. As we ate dinner, nothing fancy, just good pasta and decent wine and warm bread, I looked at my son across the table, the son I'd raised alone, who'd broken my heart and then worked so hard to earn his way back into it. The son who was still learning, still growing, still trying to be better. "I'm proud of you," I told him. "I know I've said it before, but I want you to really hear it. I'm proud of the man you're becoming. I'm proud of you too, Mom. I'm proud of how you stood up for yourself, how you refused to accept less than you deserved, how you built this whole new life at 63 years old. You're incredible. We're both incredible," I said. "We're both works in progress. And that's okay. That's better than okay. That's everything." We raised our glasses and toasted, to growth, to change, to second chances, to the messy, complicated, beautiful work of becoming who you're meant to be. And as I sat there in that small Italian restaurant, my son across from me, my new necklace warm against my skin, I realized something important. I'd spent so many years being defined by my relationships to others, as Michael's wife, as Evan's mother, as a nurse caring for patients. And those things were still part of who I was. They always would be. But now I was also just Patricia, a woman with her own interests, her own friendships, her own dreams. A woman who'd survived heartbreak and humiliation and come out stronger on the other side. A woman who knew her worth and refused to settle for less. The cheapest thing on the menu, that had never been me. I'd always been worth the 7-course meal, the private dining room, the finest wine. I'd just forgotten it for a while. But I remembered now, and I would never forget again. That night, driving home through the familiar streets of Northeast Charlotte past the gas stations and fast food restaurants and auto repair shops, I didn't feel like I was driving through a neighborhood I was trying to escape. I felt like I was driving home. This was my life. This was my world. And it was enough. I was enough. I had always been enough. My son, at the fanciest restaurant in town, told the waiter, "Serve her the cheapest dish, she doesn't deserve more," drawing laughter from everyone.